Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Cameron English. I'm the Director of Biosciences here at the American Council on Science and Health. And this week I'm joined by Dr. Josh Bloom, who is our Director of Pharmaceutical and Chemical Sciences. Josh, how are you this lovely day?
Vaccinated and happy.
Okay. Josh is vaccinated and happy, everybody, in case you were curious. We are going to talk about two more stories this week from our email newsletter called the ACSH Dispatch. And we've got one that Josh wrote and one that I wrote. And the first one is about this very strange vaccine mandate in New York City. And then the second one is about the relationship between diet soda and obesity and some interesting clinical research that's been done. But we're gonna dive into Josh's story first. So Josh, the article is called "New York's Sports Vaccine Mandates Are Just Plain Nuts." So I'm glad you're telling us how you really feel. But give us a quick rundown of this vaccine mandate that is in place in New York. I believe they're going to rescind it soon. But it's really strange. So give us a lowdown here.
Well, they've already rescinded it, I believe, and I think it's because of us, but I don't have any proof of that. But anyhow, this started when Bill de Blasio was mayor, and this was a New York City private employer mandate. So employers were required to make sure that their employees were vaccinated. So I don't know if there was any other place in the country that did that. A lot of people thought that was really overstepping. Now, it's one thing if you're working in a hospital or a nursing home, and this was at the time before there were any effective treatments, and it was just when vaccines were beginning to become available. So under those circumstances, much like with the flu vaccine, I totally get it that you'd want to have your healthcare workers, et cetera, vaccinated. And it would have to be a mandate. Makes sense. I have no problem with that. But applying it to the other workers in the city doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially since things have changed radically since the mandate was put into place. For example, at that time, there seemed to be pretty good evidence that if you were vaccinated, you were protecting others. Well, that was before Delta and Omicron came along, because especially Omicron went ripping through the entire population, vaccinated or not. Plenty of people were getting COVID twice. So I would argue that the estimates of half the country or maybe more having come down with Omicron, that your risk from getting it just from being out in the world is substantial. And if you happen to be sitting next to somebody who's not vaccinated, it may or may not be substantial. So I'm thinking that once these variants came out that were so infectious, the vaccine mandates made less sense, and especially as applied to sports, where they made no sense at all. So
now, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna ask, because I've been very critical of all the mandates, but this one seemed especially strange to me, because the players who couldn't play could still be in the building and they could still sit on the bench with the rest of their teammates, I believe. So I don't even quite understand how this is supposed to work. Can you fill me in? I don't get it at all.
Well, the article I wrote was centered around Kyrie Irving of the Nets, and he was the focal point of this early on, because he wouldn't say whether he was vaccinated, and it became obvious he wasn't, and he wasn't going to. So at that time, New York wasn't letting anybody come to work who wasn't vaccinated. So Kyrie Irving could not play in Brooklyn when the team was there, but he could play on the road. So this is crazy for a number of reasons. But even crazier is, early on, and this got changed, he wasn't even allowed to go into Barclays Center or Madison Square Garden because he wasn't vaccinated and he was an employee, except the 19,000 people sitting in Barclays Center suffering through a Nets game. Maybe 75% of them were vaccinated. So who are we protecting? Are we protecting the fans who are sitting in with, 4,000 unvaccinated people packed in while one guy who's not vaccinated is down on the floor like 90 rows away? So we're not protecting the fans. The fans are going to get it from the other fans, if they're going to get it at all, or in the subway to get to the damn game. So forget protecting the fans. What about the other players? This makes even less sense because Irving, who they then decided he could sit and watch Nets games but not play in them, just to clarify how mad this whole thing became. Let's say the Nets played a game. He could sit there and watch. Then the team packs up and they go to Cleveland, play another game. Now he can play with the same bunch of people he's been playing with. And the same staff and the coaches and everything. And they're all on the same plane. So he's not protecting the team. And to make it even dumber, assuming that's even possible, other teams could come in with non-vaccinated players and play in Brooklyn or Madison Square Garden, and that was fine. Please tell me any sense that this makes at all. It
doesn't make any sense.
None.
Not one bit. And we never had anything like that out here in California on the West Coast, but I remember going into a casino at some point in 2021 in Reno, in Nevada, and they had a policy where you could smoke inside, but in between drags of your cigarette, you had to pull up your mask.
Yeah, that's effective.
Yeah, I mean, it's preposterous whether or not you have the mask on all the time or not. But when you're smoking, it just makes it especially obvious that you're blowing mass quantities of, potentially viral particles if you're infected. And it doesn't make any sense. So the impression that I got throughout the pandemic is that whatever the policy was in a given jurisdiction, it had to be enforced no matter what. The people at the various public health departments, the governors, so on and so forth, they just became obsessed with you following the rules that they've set in place, regardless of whether or not they actually made sense. What do you think?
Well, in a way, it was a contest to see who could come up with the dumbest law. And I know California's nuts, but New York City wins this one hands down. But you have to lay a lot of the blame on the CDC here, because the guidance coming out of there was not wonderful, and it changed often. And I understand it was a new pathogen, and that we were learning about it every day. And of course, some things are going to turn out wrong that you thought early, and then when another variant comes along, everything changes. So I don't blame people for getting it wrong and then correcting it, but the overall message and the way it was delivered was really unsatisfactory. It was fragmented, it was contradictory, and so people started ignoring CDC on this, and states started making their own policies. Well, there's a mess right there. Guaranteed.
Yeah, I think we could probably talk for hours and hours about the miscommunication that happened. And it just seemed to me to be as charitable as possible that there were just too many cooks in the kitchen, because there were different points throughout the pandemic where you had the FDA and the CDC disagreeing about something. You had other points where the administration itself would say something and then the CDC would contradict that.
Yeah.
And then they would catch up and then they would say, okay, yeah, we agree now. Like with the boosters, for example, back in September, that was a good example. But it just seems, I don't know, what's the takeaway here? What's the lesson that people should learn from this fiasco in New York with this vaccine mandate?
If you've got a law or regulation that people look at and break into laughter, you probably ought to reevaluate it. Because this is like funny. It's so preposterous. It's a Saturday Night Live skit. And if you look at it and shake your head in disbelief, then it's probably time to change it. And it actually got worse before it got better, because all of a sudden then the Yankees and the Mets, who aren't vaccinated, weren't going to be able to play at home. And that's outside. So what's that about? What the Aaron Judge is at bat and there's somebody 9 miles away in the bleachers and he's going to spread his germs to them. So that really was crazy. So I think that's about as bad as it can possibly get. So now they're certainly letting athletes and performers compete and perform, and the rest of it is in motion. It's being broken down piece by piece. And a lot of people are furious that highly paid athletes are allowed to get around the rule where a fireman isn't. And of course, they're right. Nothing about it makes sense at all anymore.
All right, then. Well, maybe just a little skepticism is in order when you see a mandate like this in the future. Then, and maybe policymakers will learn from this and they'll say, maybe we should make it so everyone has to follow the rule or nobody has to follow the rule. And since the virus doesn't spread very effectively outside at all, maybe we don't have to have a mandate in place for baseball. Just, I don't know, maybe a little more thoughtful of a policy would go a long way here. But let's leave it there, Josh. My head might explode if we keep talking about this. Yeah. So let's talk about, this is another, I don't know, it's another topic where there's a lot of nonsense out there. And this is related to my story, Diet Soda Wars. Do sugar substitutes promote obesity? And I think this topic pretty well, but what I see frequently is, nutritionists and health gurus online, they'll say something to the effect of, well, diet soda has no calories, but, you get a big dopamine hit when you drink it, or it screws with your gut microbiome and it stimulates your appetite. So you end up eating more than you would have saved by drinking a diet soda. And this is supposed to be the slam dunk evidence that diet soda makes you fat, or at least it doesn't help you lose weight. And in this article, I'm looking at a meta-analysis that was just published in JAMA, and they looked at 17 clinical trials, and it's close to 2,000 overweight or obese people, and they followed them for several years. And I think the conclusion's pretty unsexy as far as I'm concerned. It basically says people who drink diet soda and they don't compensate for the calories they're saving, they lose about 2 pounds or so. If they switch to Diet Coke from Coca-Cola or, whatever sugary drink they're drinking. And this was consistent across just about all of these studies. So at least in my mind, it seems to settle the question of whether or not diet soda or the sugar substitutes in them promote weight gain, because you have all of these You have all these animal models. You might have epidemiological studies that seem to suggest that you actually get fatter from drinking diet soda. But this seems to settle it in my mind. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, politicians can never go wrong by mentioning the word children, and lousy scientists can never go wrong by mentioning artificial sweeteners, because there's always going to be something that they're going to do, and it's always bad. Maybe not in your case here, because looking at the evidence, it seems pretty straightforward that people lose weight drinking diet soda, just like common sense would tell you. I think part of the problem goes back to the dictionary, and the term artificial always stirs up a lot of attention. So these are artificial sweeteners. Well, what does that mean? The public has a very different idea of what artificial means than a chemist would. And artificial and natural are actually, they're irrelevant terms, because if you've got a chemical and it comes from a factory or it comes from a plant, it's the same chemical. And I wrote on this once about vitamin C, that people would think that it comes from squeezing oranges. Well, it doesn't. It comes from factories in China where they make it industrial process from glucose. So your vitamin C that has all the pretty green plants and flowers and green stuff on the bottle is all from a factory. So there's a buzzword there. It's artificial. So immediately they have people's attention, because this is back to nature thing that just won't stop. And if you demonize chemicals and artificial flavors and sweeteners, and you're an academic, you're going to get your paper published, no matter how bad it is. I think you probably would be hard-pressed to disagree with that.
No, I don't think I can. And what's most fascinating to me is these sweeteners, they've been on the market for years, some of them longer than others, but they've all had to go through the FDA approval process. So we've got tons and tons of evidence on the different effects they have, because as you know better than most people, I mean, getting the FDA to approve anything, it's almost an act of Congress, really, because there's so much, it's so time consuming, it's so expensive. But it's crazy to me that these studies keep getting published, and it's like another subject we were talking about just off air is that you can get these studies done, and if you do the right statistical footwork, you can get a result that will attract attention from the media. It doesn't matter if it's valid or not. If you can say what you need to say, then it seems like the paper gets published, and your university gets some attention, and maybe you get more grant money. And it's almost it's like I don't know, a self-licking ice cream cone, something like that, And I'm on the outside because I'm a journalist, but you're a scientist. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I think you absolutely nailed it. You pick something that's quote unquote in favor in the American psyche. You do a study, and especially if it's meta-analyses or retrospective studies, you can make these things come out any way you want, depending on which data set you choose or how you adjust it. So, of course, you adjust it to make your point that diet soda or artificial sweeteners are bad. It's not hard. I suspect they could, this one actually is one of the very few papers I've seen which actually is in favor of a sugar substitute, because really, if I can cut out 700, 800 calories of sugar a day, then I'm cutting out 800 calories of sugar a day. And common sense would tell you that it's less sugar, you're going to do better. except then you start getting these far-fetched theories about microbiome and stimulating appetite, and they either come from in vitro or animal studies that may or may not be relevant to human cases, or they come from data dredging. And when I see papers like this, I either ignore them or try to debunk them. It's good in this case that you actually supported it, and because common sense sort of is winning out here, because the data do support what you would intuitively think. That you consume less soda, you do better, less sugared soda. So I think this is an exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, in terms of the attention that the studies get, I think you're absolutely correct about that. What was striking to me is, as I said at the top, there were 17 clinical trials, and they were conducted all in probably the last 10 years or so. But I don't remember reading about these. I remember NPR talking about the study where if you shove sucralose down a rat's throat over and over and over, you get to a point where they gain a bunch of weight, and that gets attention. But as I said, I think this should settle it, because this is real world evidence of people actually consuming these sweeteners. Just parenthetically, as we wrap up here, they didn't find any associated risks that they thought were attributed to the sweeteners. They reported a few other studies like the National Weight Control Registry, which they didn't include in this analysis, but they said, these people report their weight loss long term. They report what they're eating, and these people are losing weight and keeping it off. They're consuming these sweeteners. They found a couple of clinical trials with adolescents, and those kids were able to keep the weight off for, I believe it was a year, and they were consuming sweeteners. So I don't know what other kind of evidence people could ask for. Like, if you were really, truly open-minded and you wanted to answer this question, I think you have the answer in this research.
For the first time, I must disagree with you. This won't settle anything.
That's why I said open-minded.
In fact, as you and I discussed earlier, I'm picking apart a paper that looks at cancer rates and artificial sweeteners, and it's the biggest piece of garbage I've ever seen. But it was published, and it made the news, and everything is wrong with it. So someone will always find something wrong with artificial sweeteners or colors or whatever, and they will get funded, and they'll get it published, and they'll get tenure. It's a crap factory, if you can tolerate that term. It's a conveyor belt of crap.
All right, well, there you have it, folks. That's Dr. Josh Bloom giving you his thoughts on the state of epidemiology today. And we'll have to have you back to discuss that study, because there's a lot of good lessons in that one as well.
If there's anyone I haven't offended, I'll work on it more to the next time. Just give me some notice.
You can tell Josh doesn't work in the academy, because he says what he says.
Thank you, Cameron.
Hey, thank you, Josh. You guys, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to get the newsletter to actually read the stories we're talking about, you can go to our website. It's acsh.org. And you can follow us on Twitter as well, which is at ACSH.org on Twitter. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.